Thank you for tuning in to episode 15 of the Launchpad. Last week, we talked nothing but IDP. So whether you are a veteran in IDP and you're looking for some really deep pulls, or whether you're brand new to IDP and you just want to learn a little bit about it, highly recommend checking that episode out. I had Matt Schauf with Draft Sharks and Jordan Rains with IDP Army, and they absolutely crushed it. Got me really excited for this season and actually helped me to convince my Dynasty League to add an extra 3 IDP slots. So definitely recommend checking that out. This week, I am joined with Eric Romoff and Jim Coventry, and we are going to talk a little bit about some sleepers and busts. But before that, we are going to talk with Eric's initiative right now, which is Pros with Joes. So, Eric, before we get into the show, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'll let Jim introduce himself, and then we can jump right in. But let everyone know where they can find you and what you've got going on with Pros with Joes.
Yeah. So like you said, my name is Eric Romoff. I'm the co-founder of Pros with Joes. We are a charity fantasy football league that is heading into our second year. So we'll certainly spend some more time talking about the work that we do over there. But anyone who's interested to learn more about it can head over to our Twitter page. It's at Pros with Joes, or to our website, proswithjoes.com. If anybody wants to hear the words that I make for some reason, you can follow me directly at FantasyNav.
Awesome. And Jim, really excited to link up with you today. You know, before we got on the show, I was talking about how great your background is. I really want to get a Kluge Lane sign that I can hang up behind me now. I got a little bit of jealousy over that. But let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter, what shows you're working on, and what you're doing before the NFL season kicks off in a week.
Yes, so you can find me at Jim Coventry NFL, and I work for RotoWire. So if you're a subscriber, great. If you're not a subscriber during the preseason, I do training camp notes frequently, and those get uploaded for free so everybody can see those. I'm also on the RotoWire Fantasy Sports Show on Sirius XM. I'm on every Saturday, one more Sunday, because then they start to cover NFL games and we lose our time spot. And then in the summers, it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but bounces around. But anyway, that's it. Geeked up for week one, getting ready to do a lot of writing behind the scenes. And thanks for having me here, guys.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for joining. And how can you not be excited? I mean, a week away from kickoff. It feels like this is my first year being full-time in the industry, and it feels like this has been the longest 9 months of my life. It has just been dragging and dragging, but then these last couple of weeks have just gone by like that, and we've got kickoff in just a week. So like I said, we'll wrap up the show with some of our favorite sleepers and busts, but we do need to talk about Pros with Joes, and I want to talk about Pros with Joes. I am thrilled to be a part of it this year. So Eric, where did you come up with this idea? What is the premise behind Pros with Joes?
Yeah, so our origin story turns out to be quite serendipitous. Our eventual champion in year one, Dave Richard, during the preseason last year, mentioned on the FF Today that he would be open to splitting the team in their CBS league with one of the listeners. And so obviously, we heard that. It sounded like a cool idea. He got a ton of interest with that concept. And that's really where the light bulb went off. We reached out to him and asked if, we were to sort of tease this concept out at scale, if he'd be interested in participating. He graciously accepted. And from there, really just went on a full-on blitzkrieg of getting in every industry expert's mentions and DMs, trying to scrape together this league in its first year. We thought we would be lucky to maybe have 10 or 12 people participate. We ended up with 56 in year one. So it really took off like wildfire.
And how many do you have this year now?
Yeah, so this year we walked it back a little bit. We went down to 42 this year. So really looking to kind of tighten up on the group and make sure that we have the level of engagement that we're looking for with all of our pros and all of our Joes. Didn't want it to sprawl too much.
Awesome. Now, the whole thing is, you get somebody who is a pro fantasy football expert, which, is kind of funny. We think we're professionals, but we're shooting in the dark a lot of the times too, realistically. But, it is a fun way for us to engage with, some of the fans out there. So how does the scoring and like how does this tournament work? Is it just everybody all in one big tournament, or are there divisions and conferences? Kind of walk us through what we should expect.
Yeah. So we are organized into 3 14-team conferences, each of which has its own standalone player pool. And those, as we get close to the end of the regular season, will then merge into a bracket and play out to an eventual champion. So essentially, each of those conferences is like its own league. And then we marry them all together in route to name our champion there in week 18.
I like that. So I mean, there's a chance that come championship week, you got a Pat Mahomes and a Pat Mahomes team playing against each other, coming from two separate divisions, huh?
Yeah. I was wondering how much overlap we would have in year one, and ultimately there were only a couple of spots on each roster in those
James
first
Robinson.
playoff brackets. James Robinson, yeah, it's a really cool think piece, right? Like you get to the end where these player pools merge, and you can really identify where those value spots and where those MVP spots were, right? If James Robinson is on every playoff team from 4 different player pools, obviously he was a huge value add for the owners in year one.
Right. Can't imagine many people that took, Michael Thomas or Saquon Barkley or Christian McCaffrey were really, really making it to that final one. So, Jim, I know you were a part of Pros with Joe's last year. How did you fare throughout this competition?
This is exactly how I fared. Dak Prescott, Joe Mixon, DK Metcalf in the second half. That's how I fared.
No.
We were battling for a playoff spot still. Kurt Holiday and I, Kurt did a great job. I just co-piloted him a little bit, but Kurt did a lot of the heavy lifting, which was awesome. And Kurt's from Africa, I believe South Africa, and it was fun. But no, good team. But like I said, we just lost a little bit too much on the injury side.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that. But if you're able to overcome it, that is awesome. Still fighting for the playoffs, even after dealing with that, is great. I love to hear that. So, I know you said Dave Richard won last year, right? Right, Eric?
That's right. Yeah.
So, who are some of the other pros that are in this that we can get a little bit excited about?
Yeah.
Besides Jim and I, of course.
Yeah, I was going to say first and foremost, Dave and Jim. Dave's here for his first year. Jim is back for a second tour of duty. Really the easiest way to think about it, if you consume fantasy content out there, we have someone from that platform participating. We've got Adam Rank, Marcus Grant, Michael Florio from NFL, Stefania Bell is back from ESPN, Dave Richards is back to defend his crown, a lot of the fantasy alarm crew, Jen Piacenti, John Mpemba. I mean, the list really goes on and on, right? So our intent was to really try to be as expansive as possible, right? We wanted to make sure that we were touching all the different corners where people consume fantasy content out there, so that we can hopefully pair people up with an analyst that they've been following for a while and kind of get that peek behind the curtain of what it's like to make those decisions.
All right. So assuming that people are watching this show, know me or know Jim, if somebody wants to play with one of us, how do they make that happen?
Yeah, so I think it's scrolling across the bottom of the screen now. You can head directly to our donor center. It's proswithjoes.rallyup.com. That will have a layout of all 42 of our pros and the amazing causes that they're supporting. From there, you can search directly. You can type in Dave's name, you can type in Jim's name, and it'll pull back those specific fundraisers. Or if you just wanted to browse every pro that's participating, you can just continue to scroll and you'll see all 42 laid out there.
Very cool. So, Jim, let's talk a little bit about strategy. When you're, co-owning one of these teams, and you did that last year, co-managing one of these teams, and you did this last year, is it something where you're just totally taking the wheel and saying, hey, this is how the expert does it, watch this? Or is it something that's a little bit more, cohesive between you and your co-manager?
So my guess is with 40-something teams this year, every team will be a little bit different. I gave Kurt my big board. I told Kurt, how would you like this to work? Because at the end of the day, it was about the Joe. It wasn't about the pro. I wanted whatever experience Kurt wanted, Kurt got. So we were on video feed. So we were able to watch and talk throughout. And whenever we got near a pick, before the pick, he would ask me, like, which players, would you recommend in the spot? But at the end of the day, Kurt made the pick. It was his team, and I just wanted to be there, give him my suggestions. He asked me questions about certain players, why I like this player or that player, and I gave him my narrative on that. And so I think for me, it was a great way to do it. I definitely, like I said, and I'll repeat it, I wanted it to be about the Joe.
I love that. And let me guess. So you drafted Dak Prescott and Joe Mixon, and that's why you're saying Kurt made the picks. Had you taken Justin Herbert and James Robinson, it'd have been all you, though, right, Jim?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Kurt did a great job. He really drafted a great team. And seriously, we had a little bad luck, but we still put together a team that almost made the playoffs despite that. And I give a big tip of the hat to Kurt Holiday.
And, we talk all the time about, crunching numbers and trying to figure out how schemes are going to work out and all that. But luck is such a big factor in fantasy football. And it kind of makes me feel like a little bit of a hack because I could sit here and, crunch all the numbers I want and put out all these takes. But, who saw James Robinson last year on the worst team in the NFL finishing as a top 10 running back? Like, nobody predicted that. That's just, the way it falls sometimes. And there is a lot of luck that goes into this. So before we get into the sleeper and bust talk, let me ask you, Jim, what is the charity that you guys are raising money for?
The Hayden Hurst Foundation. You know what? During this pandemic, more than ever, I'm realizing the level of mental health awareness that needs to be upgraded because people are struggling more than ever. And, this goes beyond the exponential jump in problems since online world became prominent, and it became even worse. And so for me right now, I think there's just so many people that need help. And so anything we could do to raise that awareness, I think is critical.
That is phenomenal, Jim. And I was a part of the Hayden Hurst Podathon just about a month ago, and they did such an awesome job there. And I feel like we should flip flop the charities because I'm doing Movember for the same exact reasons because they put a big chunk of their donations, in addition to prostate cancer and some other things, a big chunk of their donations go to men's mental health, and that's something that I am also very passionate about. So I see you just rock that mustache 365 days a year. I'll be sporting one for the month of November, and I'm hoping that we can get quite a few people to help out on that. So, Jim, after the show, you and I will be talking because I'm hoping that maybe you can help me out a little bit with this, supporting the cause. But yeah, man, men's mental health is something that really had this stigma where people wouldn't talk about it years ago. Just go to the gym, deal with it, suck it up, don't cry. That was the advice that we got a few years ago. And now people are actively talking about going out and seeking help and taking advantage of the resources that are out there. And it's just absolutely wonderful to see. Eric, what are some of the other foundations and charities that are being supported through this?
Yeah, I mean that's really one of my favorite aspects of the confine that we operate within, right? Every single pro who's participating gets to designate the cause that they want to play and raise money for. So we have the full gamut of causes out there. Giant organizations like St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, American Cancer Society, the Alzheimer's Association, all the way down to very, very local level projects, wildlife rescue, animal rescue or pet adoption, local food banks, local suicide prevention lines, right? So it's really cool to see all of the different causes that are out there and that can obviously use some help and really how these different aspects or considerations have touched our pros' lives, right? Because everyone gets to choose who they're playing for, and you get to learn a little bit more about their story as to why they made that decision.
That's so cool. So what is the overall goal that you guys have for this year as far as raising money? And then if you want to share, how close are we to that goal?
Yeah, so I like to keep things overly simple. Okay. So for me, the goal for this year was more than last year.
Love that.
Wanted to do more good than we did in 2020. And we raise money in two ways. We raise money during the preseason by pairing off Pro and Joe. Again, proswithjoes.rallyup.com. You can see all of our sweepstakes and fundraisers therein. But then in week one, we switch over and we continue to raise money throughout the duration of the season. So that money that we raise in season becomes the pot that eventually goes to the winning team's charity. So thus far in 2020, we raised a little under $10,000 with matches. About 3,500 of that was during the preseason. Here in 2021, actually about an hour and a half ago, we just crossed the $6,000 mark in our preseason fundraise. So seeing some really good traction and really excited to see just how much we can continue to grow this thing and the good that we can do.
So even with a smaller pro pool, you guys are basically, doubling what you guys were at last year. I love to hear that, man. That is absolutely awesome. So when does this close? When is the last time people can make their donations and pick the pro that they want to play with?
Yeah, so our preseason fundraiser carries on through midnight Eastern tomorrow. So you've got about 28 hours or so, 29 hours to get in there and make a contribution to one of those causes. And then they're kicking off in week one. Like I said, we immediately shift over to our in-season fundraise. So got about a day and a half, a little less, to pair off with the fantasy expert of your choice. And then from there, we'll continue to do good work all throughout the season.
Cool. So last question I got regarding Pros with Joe's here. Obviously, everyone should be following fantasy. Following you at Fantasy Nav. Everyone should be following at Pros with Joe's. Who else should we be following on Twitter to support this?
Yeah, so those are really the two big ones, and more so at Pros with Joe's, right? I live stream, my podcast, I write, but ultimately, all light and attention should be focused over to the charity. That's really where the vast majority of all of our posting and the good work that we're doing is centralized out of. One of the things that is new about this year is we've actually partnered up with one of our pros from year one, Dr. Roto. He recently launched a new premium site, drroto.com. Anyone who's heard his story or who hasn't heard his story for that matter, it's phenomenal. He needed an organ transplant. He needed a kidney and was able to find a kidney donor through the fantasy community. So I think it's just a really awesome encapsulation of the power and the amount of good that this community is capable of doing. So when he started up the site, he was looking back on his experience from last year, and it just seemed like there was a lot of overlap in our mission of trying to do some good by way of the fantasy community. So drroto.com is where our website is housed. It's where our weekly podcasts will live every single week, starting in week 1. And of course, Doc Roto himself is back to participate in year 2.
Awesome. Now, Jim, is there anything else before we get into some fantasy football talk? Is there anything else with the Pros with Joe's that you would like to highlight, either from your experience last year or what to expect going into this season?
Yes, I'm excited that I know a number of people have messaged me to say that they have entries and they're excited about that. And that makes me so happy. I love this job because I can interact with others. That's what it's about. Yeah, it's football, but it's people, and it's bringing people together. And Kurt Holiday and I are friends now because of Pros with Joe's. And I know I'm going to draft with somebody this year, and we're probably going to become friends as well. And I'm very excited about that. And one last thing, Jeff Erickson from RotoWire is in as well. Got to give my teammate a plug here. Jeff was in last year as well. So I'd love to see Jeff Erickson in as well.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like you are a great advocate for this. Can't wait to hopefully we end up in the same division because, it would be fun to play against you. Can't wait to see who I get paired up with as well. This is going to be an absolute blast. Eric, I appreciate the invite. You might not even realize this, but you and I did a show together last season, and that was the first show I ever hosted. It was kind of a random, somebody set it up, and I thought it was Chase Vernon. I thought he was going to be hosting the show, and you and I were going to be on there. And then that morning, Chase goes, "No, dude, you're hosting this one. Figure it out. You can do it." And that's how I got into hosting shows. So I truly wouldn't be here without you. And we talked after that show, said that, I'd get to be a part of this Pros with Joe's this year, and I am thrilled for it. So you can see it down at the bottom, proswithjoes.rallyup.com. You can select all of the pros there, whoever you want to play with, make your donation before midnight tomorrow and get an opportunity to be a part of this awesome initiative that Eric has put together. Well, let's go ahead and jump into some football talk. Like I said at the beginning of the show, we are just 1 week away from kickoff, and I couldn't be giddier. I just realized it today, actually, that I was like, we've been talking about draft strategy for so long, and then this morning, I started thinking we actually have matchups to talk about here. And I was looking at some of the week 1 matchups and started getting really excited, started tinkering with some DFS lineups. I am ready, but we still have a lot of people that are going to be drafting this weekend before this kicks off. So let's talk about some draft sleepers and busts. Why don't you go ahead and start us off here, Jim? Who is one sleeper that you are keeping an eye on this year?
I'm very excited about James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. Now, look, everybody talks about the injury history. He's played at least 13 games in 3 of his 4 seasons. He's on the field more than not. He had a 95th percentile broken tackle rate, but because he was running behind that Pittsburgh line that couldn't run block, his 4.3 yards per carry was actually really good. But now the best point, he goes to Arizona. Now, Arizona last year, we know they love to run 4 receiver sets, but they can't always because they didn't have guys. Well, they do have guys this year. Worst case scenario, they run 3 receiver set. Here's my point. The box is going to be light. Conner is 233 pounds. He's a sledgehammer. But here's where he gains. Last year, teams started with New England, and I believe week 11. Normally, when you put an extra defensive back in, you'll take out a linebacker. New England took out a defensive lineman, and they went fast in the back. Arizona couldn't throw the ball. They couldn't run, though, because neither Drake or Chase Edmonds were unable to run against a super light front. I believe James Conner was a purpose addition because with those dictated fronts, he has the frame to take advantage. And their offensive line is very good. Per Sports Info Solutions, they were 60th percentile, above average, and they bring in Rodney Hudson at center from the Raiders. And I'm going on here, but I got a story. I'm sorry.
No, so, I want to hear this. This is the type of analysis I love. This is so much better than numbers. Let's hear this narrative here, Jim.
Yes. So that's the whole point. They're going to see super light fronts. They have a big back with a great broken tackle rate. He will get to the second level so frequently because he will have very little to deal with. He'll have holes to run. And so James Conner is a screaming value here. And when teams go lighter, the pounding he takes is going to be much lesser. He is not going to see a stacked box literally at all. One more thing. Kenyon Drake last year, over 50 red zone touches, 20 of those inside the 5. This team moves the ball, and they run high pace. Well, if they're in that part of the field, I think James Conner is going to do some serious damage. So I have him as a very high performer who you can get in the 8th or the 9th round of most 12-team league drafts.
Jim, where were you a couple months ago? I've done 200 shows this offseason, and that is the most compelling argument I've heard for James Conner. And now I'm really regretting not going out and drafting more James Conner. But yeah, I mean, that offensive line was horrendous, and we know that. So what I hear from you is maybe that we should start pushing Najee Harris down a little bit, but I'm kidding. But 2 years ago, we saw James Conner crush it. Like, we know he's a talented running back. And then everyone wants to focus on, he's missed time every single season. But I love that you highlighted that he's played 13 games in every season. I mean, every running back is going to miss time. He's played 13 games in every single season. So.
Except for one, but yes.
Except for one, sorry. But yeah, I got to say, that is the most compelling James Conner argument that I've heard this entire offseason. I love it. Eric, who is one of the sleepers that you are keeping an eye on heading into your drafts this weekend?
Yeah, so I guess I've had Jim sitting on my shoulder all offseason. I've got a ton of James Conner out there. I love the opportunity that he has there in Arizona, how much they run 4 wide receiver sets, and the 10 touchdowns that Kenyon Drake left behind. So Jim and I, unbeknownst to one another, have been in lockstep on that front. Another sleeper that comes to mind for me is my guy Damian Harris. Looking there in New England, yet again, seemed like every single year they're trotting out another top-tier offensive line. And the biggest consideration for Damian Harris happened a few days ago in the news, and that was the release of Cam Newton. So I think the first question that needed to be answered was whether or not you were in on Damian Harris in the first place. If you were, like me, I actually now have him inside of my top 20. I've got him as a back-end RB2, and it really has to do with not having to vacate those high-value goal line attempts to Cam Newton, to his quarterback, right? Mac Jones is not going to be vulturing those red zone and green zone opportunities. And if you look back over the course of 2020, Cam Newton was 10th in the league in red zone in rushes inside the 10, 6th in the league inside inside the 10, and 4th in the league inside the 5. So he had 19.
And not for quarterbacks, just overall. Not for league. Quarterbacks. This is running backs and everything. Right. It was unbelievable.
So Cam Newton himself had 19 rushing attempts inside the 5, and now Damian Harris has first crack at all of those. So his ceiling just took an incredible leap up when Cam Newton left New England earlier in the week.
Yep. I mean, Jim, you know this. You're a radio guy. It always makes for really good shows when people are disagreeing. But all we're doing right here is we've talked about these first two guys is just nodding our heads. So hopefully we'll get something a little spicy that we can disagree on. But, man, I am with you on Damian Harris. He was getting drafted in the 8th, 9th round early in the offseason. And I tweeted something out saying, hey, I'm totally okay reaching for Damian Harris 3 rounds early because I think he's going to be that good. And sure enough, I did my home league draft last night with all of my buddies from Chicago, and Damian Harris went in the 3rd round. That's how the hype train for this kid is out of control now. So I'm happy that I was able to lock in my shares when he was getting drafted in the 8th or 9th. I mean, third is a little rich for me, but yeah, this kid is just set up to succeed this year. He outperformed every running back by every metric last year. I can't wait to see what he can do. Jim, let's go back to you. Who is another guy that you think everybody's sleeping on right now that you're trying to get in your fantasy football drafts?
Yes, people are really sleeping on Brandon Cooks, and I understand why. Some people feel the Texans are toxic. Yes, they're toxic. I'll agree. Do they have a good quarterback? No. Tyrod Taylor, though, is a professional quarterback. And here's my case for Cooks. Cooks proved last year, especially down the stretch when Will Fuller was suspended, he was running all types of routes. He was no longer just a deep threat. He was successful running all these routes. People talk about an injury history. He's missed, and I'm going to look this up right now. He's missed 3 games in his career. He's been playing since 2014. And I get it, he had a concussion, but at the end of the day, a lot of players have had concussions. We can't rule him out for that. Now, why do I like him besides the ability to run multiple routes? The Texans are likely to be trailing by double digits in the second quarter of most games this year. They are going to be among the league leaders in passes. I guarantee they're going to throw 40-plus passes in most games. He's the clear number 1 receiver. Teams who are playing them may have backups in the second half. It could be that ugly. And at the end of the day, Brandon Cooks is a great receiver. Tyrod Taylor is a professional quarterback. The target share, we could see 160 targets to Brandon Cooks. He is going in the same range where James Conner is. This is a wide receiver 1 on his team who is a good player. He's had at least 1,080 maybe yards in all but 1 season of his career. I have no reason to think, at the very worst, he's a wide receiver 2 this year.
I couldn't agree with you more. Again, hopefully we'll disagree at some point, but Brandon Cooks, I don't get it. I mean, all this guy does is pump out 1,000-yard seasons. And I think the knock is just that he's always played with good quarterbacks. He got to play with Tom Brady and Drew Brees and Deshaun Watson. And people are like, well, maybe he can't do it with Tyrod Taylor. It doesn't matter who his quarterback is. He's going to command targets. And that's what you're chasing in fantasy football. I'm with you. I think 150 targets is not only within his range of outcomes, I think that might be his floor. I mean, it's going to be easy for him to step into a heavy role this year. Eric, I saw you nodding. Do you have anything to add to Brandon Cooks, or do you want to jump into your next sleeper?
Yeah, I mean, nothing to add that Jim hasn't already brought up. I, unfortunately, myself am a Texans fan. So he is spot on in saying that it is reasonable to expect this team to be down by 10 points or more every single week. And so that is going to dictate passing volume, and Brandon Cooks is going to be the first option there in that offense. So he's a player that I have a ton of exposure to across all the different teams that I've drafted. In terms of my next sleeper, I wanted to go a little bit deeper and specifically look at the tight end position. And this player in particular is someone that I started really doing a bit more research on when all of my Irv Smith shares turned into pumpkins as he goes on season-ending IR. And that's Austin Hooper out of Cleveland. He very much so had a season of fits and starts in 2020. He had a little bit of a hard time grasping the offense and getting involved. And then obviously he missed some time to injury. But if you look from the last 6 weeks of the season, week 14 on, including the playoffs, he averaged over 8 targets per game in those six games. So only Kelsey and Waller were receiving a volume or a target volume that was north of that over the course of the season. And Austin Hooper is essentially free. You can get him as the last player off the board in your draft. You can very likely go to your waiver wire and scoop him up if you're dealing with an Irv Smith injury like I am in many places. So you look at that Cleveland offense, they are very much so a quick strike, short area passing game. And looking over that sample of the last 6 games of the season, there's reason to believe that Austin Hooper is going to get at least enough volume from a target standpoint to return dividends relative to where he's being drafted.
I'm with you. And I mean, let's just talk about the fact that this guy is 6'4", 250 pounds. I mean, he is an absolute beast when he gets the ball in his hands. So I think Austin Hooper is a great value. He's not somebody that I've really been targeting, but I have heard a lot of pro Hooper arguments lately, and you're adding to that. So that might be a guy that I'll start taking some shots on in the 18th round of my best ball leagues coming up in the next week or so here. Sure. How are you feeling about Austin Hooper, Jim? Is that a guy that you're on this year?
So I like Eric's points, and I understand your rationale. The target thing, we got to be careful. Of those numbers, he had 15 targets in week 16 against the Jets when all of the receivers were out with COVID. So his target share down that stretch, this was from week 12 on, 2, 2, 6, the 15, a 5, an 11, and a 3. So I get it, but let's remember that week 16 game was critical, and that was a huge DFS game I put him in for because I knew he was going to see a gajillion targets. But Eric, your analysis is still good, though.
And hey, that's what this is about. We can't agree on everything, and this is what we needed. I saw you shaking your head a little bit, and that's why I asked you, Jim. This makes for better radio, better TV, whatever you want to call it. But Jim, let's go ahead and jump into your next guy. Who was the last guy that is your kind of sleeper pick for this 2021 draft?
T. Higgins. They're drafting his teammate, the rookie, Jamar Chase, ahead of him. I don't get this. I think what happened was T. Higgins became an alpha before our eyes last year. However, he didn't do it the first couple weeks. He was very quiet. And then all of a sudden, between weeks 5 and 10, before Burrow got hurt, he was a wide receiver 1. He was posting every week, running all types of routes. He was getting deep. He was open in the shallow area of the field. He could run it all, and Burrow locked in on him. But then, of course, Burrow goes down. The numbers the rest of the way were not good. He still was the wide receiver 30 from weeks 12 to 16, despite playing with terrible quarterback play. But that says something. Regardless, I think people missed that little nugget that was buried in the middle of the season where he had already arrived and Burrow then was gone. And I think they're going to pick right up where they left off. And I believe for at least one more year, Higgins is the alpha there. Now, Chase may be something down the road. He may be a superstar, but I don't see it this year. I think that chemistry that Higgins and Burrow had is real. This is another team. They're going to run 11 personnel all day long. They're used to throwing out of it. Yes, there's no protection, but Higgins is not just a deep guy, as I said. He can get open at all levels. So I think he's immune to the pressure. And again, this is a team that's going to trail a lot.
I agree with everything you said there. Now, let's talk about Jamar Chase for a quick second, because like you said, Jamar Chase is getting drafted ahead of him. Are you worried about these drops? I mean, is this something that we should start to be a little bit concerned about? I mean, this guy can't catch anything. And I get he didn't play the 2019 season, but the drops were a big story going into last week's game. And they set him up with a bubble screen that he could have just done some work with, and it bounced off of his hands. I mean, you got to be a little bit concerned about this, right?
Yeah, and I faded him all preseason and just full disclosure. But that said, all right, he's got a case of the yips. Does it go away? Probably. He got to this point being a phenomenal college receiver. The odds of him keeping the drops at that level are small. Now, the thing that concerned me a little bit was the talk in camp that he wasn't separating from the Cincinnati defensive backs, his teammates.
Yeah.
That was a little troubling. And that's the problem. A lot of college players bust at the NFL level because very simply, they could dominate against boys, but sometimes they can't dominate against men. So I'm not going to dismiss what Chase is going to be or say he's going to be this or that, but at least for now, I have 0 shares this year, and I'm open. Since I won't have any shares, I'll spend this year watching him to see what he may become.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly worrisome. I try not to overreact to the preseason, but there has not been a good report about Jamar Chase out of Cincinnati since they drafted him.
No.
Sure, they're kicking themselves a little bit for passing on Penny Sewell at this point. Speaking of drops, though, Eric, let's get into the last guy that you want to talk about that you think is your sleeper for the year.
Yeah, so my last sleeper, I was thinking of the exact same tag, and that's Deontay Johnson, right? Looking at his 2020 campaign, he finished with 144 targets. He was 5th in the league, or 5th amongst wide receivers in average targets per game. So for me, it's really about a volume play. Deontay Johnson is very much so in a position where he can finish 5th or well within the top 10 at the position in terms of the target volume that he's going to command in an offense that throws the ball a ton. The Pittsburgh Steelers offense threw the ball more than any other team in the league last year. If you look at the last 3 weeks of the regular season, they threw the ball almost 54 times a game. So there's so much passing volume coming there out of Pittsburgh. And because of the degradation that we've seen in Ben Roethlisberger's ability to move the ball downfield, a lot of that is in that short to mid area range where Deontay Johnson is just absolutely lethal. So to look at a guy like that who's coming off right around the 4-5 turn, midway into the 4th round, and could bring a volume that is well into the top 10. It's just an incredible value for me. And the thing that I think is maybe depressing his value a little bit, in addition to kind of the 3-headed receiving core there in Pittsburgh, are those drops last year, right? We all remember him getting benched because of those drops in the 2020 season.
Primetime game. That's what it was.
Over the course of the NFL, drops aren't really that sticky of a stat. From year to year, they tend to get tightened up pretty well. So I actually think that we'll see some regression working in his favor on the drops front this year.
Yep, Couldn't agree more with anything he said. I don't know if there's anybody in the industry that's higher than I am on Deontay Johnson. I have him slotted in as my wide receiver 11. And the fact that he's going right now in the 6th, 7th round is mind-boggling to me. So you already called out the 144 targets, but he missed one game. There are 2 other games that he left in the first quarter with an injury. So if you just look at the games when he was healthy, he was averaging 12.8 targets per game in games that he played the full game. You multiply that by a 17-game season, that's 218 targets. Now, I'm not saying that Deontay Johnson's going to hit 218 targets, but that was literally his pace when he was healthy last year. Like you said, Big Ben doesn't have that arm to push it down the field anymore. And that guy that is wide open across the middle of the field, on the bubble screens, on those short to intermediate routes, every single play is Deontay Johnson. It wouldn't surprise me if he averages 12-plus targets per game this year. So I'm with you, and that's not even like a hot take or a sleeper for me. I'm drafting this guy in the 3rd or 4th round without even batting an eye. I think that he is a bona fide stud. I love that call, Eric. Let's get to the not so fun parts. Here we are talking about our favorite guys we can get excited about. Now comes the part where people get angry because you start dunking on their favorite player. We're going to talk about some guys that we think are busts. And let's start with you, Jim. Who is the one guy that you think is a bust right now at his current ADP?
So this is a natural segue from our last discussion about Deontay Johnson. Chase Claypool, love the talent. He will be a superstar in the league. Firmly convinced of that. Not happening this year. Look, you guys mentioned Ben Roethlisberger's arm in the second half of the season was toast. Claypool, after putting up great yardage, only hit 70 yards one time after week 7. And that was the game Mason Rudolph played in week 17 against the Browns. That was a 100-yard game. And
wow.
Yes, here's the problem in Pittsburgh. Defenses figure things out in the offseason. Teams are very poor at making in-season adjustments. Defensive coordinators, in my opinion, are going to do this to the Steelers. They realize they were a horrible run blocking line, but surprisingly, they were graded higher for pass blocking, but that's because Ben got it out somewhat quickly, okay? But they lose Pouncey, they lose Villanueva, and they lose DeCastro. Now, they know Ben's arm is toast. They don't have a line. What are defenses going to do? They are probably going to jam the receivers and stack the box, because they're going to dare Ben to beat them deep because they know he can't. Claypool will have very little chance because Ben is not only the press receivers, but they're going to see like blitzing too. And Ben is not going to be able to throw the ball downfield. So Chase Claypool this year is an avoid. Once Ben's gone and they have a good quarterback, hopefully that changes. But I am very concerned that this Pittsburgh offense could be a train wreck this year.
You know, I'm with you. And Chase Claypool is a guy that, I love. But last year, his season, his big games were bolstered by 11 touchdowns. And I think that he has an opportunity to do something similar to that because they're going to use him a lot in the red zone. I mean, we saw him getting handoffs in the red zone. If they get there, exactly. And that's kind of the fear is I don't know if they're going to be able to get there. And we know that touchdowns, those tend to regress down. And he's not going to see that elite target share. Somebody like Deontay Johnson that we just talked about will. So Chase Claypool, the player, arguably one of my favorite guys in the league. I mean, he just has that size, speed, strength, everything you want to see in a receiver. But yeah, with no offensive line and Big Ben's noodle arm, I don't know how they're going to be able to utilize him. So that's kind of a tough one for me to stomach because I love Chase Claypool, the player, but his situation this year is just awful. Eric, is there anything you want to add to Claypool, or do you want to go into your bust?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to maybe consider for Claypool, especially relative to his ADP, is he does have some pop. If you're still drafting in best ball out there, he could certainly be a back of the bench kind of guy that can win you a week or two here and there. But that volatility, it's so vast that trying to depend on him week in and week out, you're going to have a bad time this year.
Yeah, that's a bummer, unfortunately. But that's crazy, Jim, that you called out. I didn't even realize the 100-yard game he had was without Big Ben. That's a great stat, man. Nice pull. I like that one. I might be using that on a show in a couple of days. I'll make sure to credit you.
Oh, don't worry about it.
Eric, let's go ahead. Who is the next bust that you've got?
Yeah, so my first bust off the list is probably a bit spicier, but I actually categorize it in a similar light to the way we were talking about Chase Claypool. I love this player. He's actually inside my top 5 at wide receivers from a dynasty perspective, but specifically in the spectrum of 2021, I actually think A.J. Brown's going to be a bust this year. If you look over the course of 2020, Tennessee yet again was one of the lowest volume passing offenses in the league. They passed the ball barely 30 times per game, and the fantastic year that he had in 2020 was really the result of 11 touchdowns coming his way, and that was across 70 receptions. So just looking at it from a statistical standpoint, that type of efficiency is very, very hard to count on, especially considering that our guy A.J. Brown is going off as wide receiver 8, sort of midway into the second round, maybe at the 2-3 turn. And so there are just so many guys around that. Justin Jefferson, Scary Terry. I'm a big Allen Robinson believer this year that I would rather have at that price point as opposed to having to bank on what is an incredible efficiency that we saw to boost A.J. Brown's number into the top 10 in 2020.
Yeah, man, I agree with you on this one too. I love A.J. Brown, the player. And I actually, about 2 months ago, I went into an article, and this is what you're not supposed to do, but this is what I like about the writing process. I went into an article, and I already titled the article before I started writing it, A.J. Brown is this year's wide receiver 1. And then I did this deep dive on it, spent 3 days just digging stats and looking at tape. And by the time I finished the article, I had moved him down to wide receiver 7. And I just realized that, no, it is not within his range of outcomes to even finish as the wide receiver 1 unless we see a historic amount of touchdowns. So that's a tough one for me to stomach, but I'm kind of with you, man. And Julio Jones there. I mean, this team, in order for A.J. Brown to hit his ADP, this team needs to fundamentally change the way that they play the game. Derrick Henry, needs to see half the amount of touches that he's seeing. This team needs to start throwing the ball a lot. It's going to be tough for A.J. Brown and Julio Jones to both succeed at their current ADP. Jim, do you have anything to add to that, or you want to talk about your bust?
We're gonna fight. We're gonna fight here.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it. What do you got to say for A.J. Brown?
Sometimes we have a player who's a transcendent talent. A.J. Brown, after his rookie year, I coined him as TO version 2.0. He is an absolute unstoppable beast no matter where you throw him the ball. If you throw it to him short, he's 6'1", 226. He will run over the defensive backs. The touchdowns come because he can't be stopped. He can also get over the top and beat you. If defenses decide to stop Derrick Henry and they stack the box, the problem is fewer bodies in the secondary. A.J. Brown's going to beat that. Now, the Tennessee defense, if possible, got worse in the offseason. Mm-hmm. They got rid of their corners, and they couldn't play to start. This team may have to score 40 points a week to win. And we can't forget, Arthur Smith is gone. Arthur Smith was one of the best game planners and play designers I've seen. He leveraged his run game, his pass game, took exactly what the defense gave them. I don't think Todd Downing has that. I think they're going to trail a lot. And A.J. Brown, look, he's only got 106 targets last year. 2 knees that both needed surgery. He played on them all season. He broke 1,000 yards with 11 touchdowns on 106 targets. If he gets 140 targets, Lord only knows what we're going to see out of him. So I get what you guys are saying. But this man may be, aside from DK Metcalf, the most physically imposing receiver in the game. And if he's healthy, and if Julio, who will at least keep defenses a little bit honest, even if you double AJ, I think he's fine. But there are plays he's to get single covered. You guys may be right, but I with him, I am going to bet on what I consider a transcendent talent who hasn't come close to reaching his apex yet. We could see something out of him we've never seen before.
I agree with that. I mean, like you said, he is a transcendent talent. I think as far as a physical specimen, he's up there with DK Metcalf. He's just a more polished route runner and, a better, more skilled player than DK Metcalf. It's just, this Titans team, and maybe with Arthur Smith being gone, we do see a fundamental change in how they play, but they kind of have 3 transcendent talents when you look at Derrick Henry, A.J. Brown, and Julio Jones. So this could very well be a team that, goes from just grinding the clock and winning on defense to being a 40, 50-point scoring team. And if you expect that to happen, absolutely. This is definitely the Tennessee Titans are one of the more polarizing teams out there this year. And I want to believe that they are going to start throwing the ball a little bit more with Derrick Henry now being 27 years old, getting a little bit older. You got to think that they don't want to give him the ball 350 times every single season. So I expect them to scale that back a little bit. I just don't know if it's going to be A.J. Brown or Julio Jones that's going to take over as the wide receiver 1. As much as I love A.J. Brown, Julio Jones is going to command a lot of targets there too. So I could see this going either way. He arguably is the best wide receiver in the league, and it is tough to bet against talent.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind for me is really where he's being drafted, right? And specifically this high up on the draft board, it's all about nuance, right? We're talking about wide receiver 7 or 8 off the board. I think at least it sounds like Dave and I are closer to the same camp. If he's there around wide receiver 10 or 11, I think we're both jumping all over that opportunity, right? But the thing for me, specifically looking for my wide receiver 1, I'm looking for a player where the wide receiver 1 finish is in their range of outcomes. And there's just a lot of work that maybe has to do. Maybe they shift more coverage over to Julio Jones. Maybe they throw the ball more to where that introduced a lot of risk in the question whether or not he finishes as wide receiver 1 overall.
Yeah, I mean, as a Bears fan, I'm stoked to watch the Bears play. But the 3 teams that I'm most excited about this year are the Bears, the Titans, to see how they operate under this newfound offense, and then Seattle with Shane Waldron over there, and I want to see how that team changes up. So Bears, Titans, and Seahawks are the 3 teams that I'm most excited about this weekend coming up. Jim, let's go into your next bus. Who's the guy that you are not too excited about at his ADP right now?
Josh Jacobs. I think he's going around running back 18 or so. I have this running back 30. I have nowhere in, and here's why. Not just the 3.9 yards per carry last year, which was horrible, way below league average. But since he arrived in Las Vegas, they have done everything they can to bring in receiving backs. They brought in anybody with a pulse that was a receiving back, and they paid Drake real money. And that's still not even my issue. My issue is Jacobs was bad last year, but they lost 3 linemen. Rodney Hudson, gone. Gabe Jackson, gone. Trent Brown, and last name Williams or Brown.
One.
Yeah, one of the big Trents, gone. 3 outstanding linemen for a running back who was below average. Now, not only will the 3 lost linemen impact Jacobs, who probably is just a 2-down grinder now, but he's a player that scored 19 touchdowns in 2 seasons. How much are they going to be in the red zone? And Derek Carr, if there is a quarterback more hypersensitive to pressure, show him to me. He's been protected well behind that line the last 2 years, and Carr's had 4,000 yards, averaged 24 touchdowns. But again, teams can pressure him now because that line is going to be significantly worse. He's going to struggle to move the ball. The red zone carries are going to go down. Their defense is bad and they're going to trail. They're going to need a passing down back. Kenyon Drake is going to see a lot of work, and Jacobs just didn't show to be that good last year.
Yeah. I can't argue with that. I've got him a little bit higher than you, but I've still got him as RB26. And that pretty much means that I have no shares of Josh Jacobs because people are always taking him before that. So I agree with everything you said on that one, Jim. Eric, I saw you nodding a lot, so I think you agree on this one as well with Josh Jacobs. Let's talk about the next guy that you are fading that you think is going to be a bit of a bust this year.
Yeah, so he's actually a darling of the last week or so, and this fade is like most relative to his ADP, and that's Gus Edwards out of Baltimore. You look at the injury to J.K. Dobbins and sort of paint by numbers. It seems logical that Gus Edwards is going to slot right into that opportunity, and overwhelmingly, I think it's fair to expect to see his workload increase significantly, right? But even with that, even with J.K. Dobbins out of the way, the 2 biggest limiting factors, we've yet to see Gus Edwards really contribute in a consistent and meaningful way in the receiving game out of the backfield. That's a question mark that he's either going to have to answer and develop into, or in my estimation, more likely, the Ravens are going to look to solve and answer by way of acquisition with other running backs coming into that room. And the biggest limiting factor, this is the point that I got at with Damian Harris in my sleepers, he is still splitting carries with Lamar Jackson, and specifically those highest value scoring positions carries are going to be going, at least in part, over to Lamar. So while he now has the inside track on the majority of the rushing work there in Baltimore, he's still hampered by his upside, is still hampered by sharing that red zone carrying responsibility with Lamar Jackson. So looking at him jumping up to an ADP of right around 50 over the last week. He's up nearly 60 spots since J.K. Dobbins went down. It's just a little too rich for my blood, right? If he was closer to the 75, 80 range that Harris occupied over the course of most of the summer, I think he's a really good grab at that point. But to be reaching into him, right around the 4th round, it's just a little too much for me.
Yep, I agree with you. And, in just working off that a little bit, I absolutely love Tyson Williams. He's a guy right now that's going in the 13th, 14th round, and this kid can ball. And I don't think there's much of a passing game for any running back, realistically. I mean, that was a knock even on J.K. Dobbins when he was getting drafted in the second and third round, that he wasn't going to contribute in the passing game. So I don't think you can expect that. But Tyson Williams, this kid is so good that he is going to demand touches. Right now, he can get had in the 13th, 14th round. And with how much this team runs the ball, I think he could still carve out, 10 to 12 touches every single week. And the kid is just crazy, crazy talented. I haven't, since J.K. Dobbins has gotten hurt, I think I've left every single draft with Tyson Williams. Jim, I see you got to say something. Did you want to add to this?
One ad. I'm going to support what you guys are saying. So when they had J.K. Dobbins, look, Gus Edwards is very good, but J.K. Dobbins is significantly better. And yet in the last 5 weeks of the season, they both averaged 11 carries. That includes playoffs. Now, if Dobbins was that much better, it split the work with Edwards. If Edwards goes into Dobbins' role, well, Tyson Williams is probably the same level down from Williams, if at all, than the level from Dobbins to Edwards. So there's a possibility it's split like it was the last 5 weeks where both are seeing about 11 carries. So that would support what you guys are saying, both for fading Edwards and also for rising up Williams, who's going 9 rounds later or 10 rounds later even. So, so I like what you guys said there.
I mean, I think I'm going to need a neck massage after this because of how much I've been nodding at everything you're saying, Jim. I mean, you are just speaking my language here. You're absolutely crushing it. Couldn't agree more. But let's get into the final bus, and we'll start off with you, Jim. Who is the one guy that you don't want at his ADP?
Yeah, it's not a talent issue. Again, it's Mark Andrews. And the reason is Mark Andrews has not had great volume. He's had 98 targets 2 years ago, 88 last year. He's been productive. 10 touchdowns 1 year, 7 the next. He had an 850 and a 700 yards. Good player. But here's the problem. He was really their number one receiver. Now, I don't know when Bateman's coming back, but eventually he'll be back. Sammy Watkins for fantasy is not a thing, but Sammy Watkins is an NFL receiver, and they don't throw much on his team. They run 57% of the time. There are going to be some targets that are going to go away from Mark Andrews just because there are other players there. And if Bateman does anything, even from week 5 on, I have to think that hit hurts Mark Andrews. And now Mark Andrews is no longer the only guy with size in the red zone. They have potentially 3 options in the red zone. And so I just think the volume's going to go down just enough that Mark Andrews isn't going to merit that top 5 ADP. And I think he ends up like more as a tight end 7 or 8, only because of a little drop in volume would hurt him a lot.
Yeah. And man, I really want to disagree with you, Jim. I promise. Like I want to try to combat something that you're saying, but Mark Andrews is a guy that I'm lower on for that exact reason. They added, and you didn't even mention Tylan Wallace, but he's a very capable receiver himself too. I mean, they added 3 good receivers to a team that didn't have any receivers last year. So that is a huge knock on Mark Andrews, and people are still treating him off of his 2019 and 2020 production, which is going to be very, very tough for him to replicate. So agree with you on that one too, Jim. Eric, who is the final guy that you've got that you should be avoiding in your drafts this weekend?
Yeah, so I'm probably going to expose a bit of my own bias here as a Brandon Ayuk fan, and that's to say that I'm fading Deebo Samuel this year. If you look at that San Francisco offense overall, it is always in the back half. It ranks amongst the back half in the number of pass attempts per game. So the ball isn't being distributed to pass catchers all that often, and there are just so many mouths to feed, right? Obviously, Kittle is going to remain the primary target in that offense. But then you look at the emergence of Brandon Ayuk. You look at the ability for the running backs, not only for Raheem Mostert, but also with the rookies there in Trey Sermon and Eli Mitchell. There are so many players that are able to receive the ball in what is a very limited number of opportunities in terms of the number of times that San Francisco is passing, that I think Deebo is really going to take a step back relative to his value there around wide receiver 85. So overall, Deebo's value is one where it's a lot of gimmick plays, it's a lot of sweeps, it's a lot of end arounds where he's really popping these big plays. And I just don't feel too comfortable relying on those continuing to bear fruit relative to the cost that he's going to cost me in drafts this year.
Now, logically, I heard everything you said and I understand everything you said, Eric, but that dude is just a dog when he gets the ball in his hands. Like, you can't take him down. And that's what he does. And that's kind of what I like about him is he has such a high floor as a fantasy football player because I think that they manufacture touches for him. You know that he's going to get, 4 to 6 carries every single game, that they're going to try to work these screens and stuff for him. So I can understand that seems to be the reason a lot of people are fading him is because they say he gets these gimmicky plays. And that's kind of the reason I like him so much is because he's going to get these gimmicky plays that he can break off for a big play every once in a while. So I understand with everything you said, and I realize that there is a very hard line in the sand right now. We know that this team isn't going to be able to support both Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, and everybody has kind of picked their guy, whether it's Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel. I understand that you're on the Ayuk, and I'm kind of on the Deebo train, but you make a strong argument, and I agree with everything that you said.
At one point, we know Kyle Shanahan, the way he could scheme up offense. And I liken this back to 2012 when he was with the Washington team. I won't call them what they were called back then. We don't need to do that. So anyway, remember RG3? Well, they would use him on play action, and the plays were schemed up where receivers were running deep downfield wide open. Pierre Garçon was their best receiver. They had like no receiver room otherwise, and yet everything was open. I assume Trey Lance gets in at some point sooner than later. And if he does, I wonder if Lance not only is going to have those wide open deep throws, but I think where Samuel operates a lot, I think we're going to see a lot of running from Trey Lance. And if he runs a lot, if it even takes away a few of those opportunities from Deebo, he's the natural one that it would go away from, I would think. He's schemed open. It's beautiful. But at the end of the day, I wonder how he and Lance are going to coexist, where Lance is going to be dominant off those RPOs, and they may not need to use Samuel the same way they did. I'm conflicted because I could see them doing it, but I could see Lance not fitting as well with that one component.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons, this kind of dawned on me a couple months ago, I think one of the reasons that this 49ers team is so polarizing, in addition to Trey Lance being there, not knowing what the quarterback situation is going to be, but I think it comes down to Brandon Ayuk, because a lot of people say that Brandon Ayuk just took over and became an alpha last year, and a lot of other people attribute that breakout to injuries to Deebo Samuel and George Kittle. So now that we've seen Ayuk fully developed with a year underneath his belt, how is he going to fit back in with a healthy George Kittle and Deebo Samuel? And really, nobody knows. We're all kind of speculating at this point. We'll find out after the first couple of weeks. But like we said, this is a run-first team, and I don't think there's any way that George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel are all going to be able to contribute.
One thing I will add, and I'm kind of piggybacking on something I said earlier, just remember, the Shanahan offense always has the deep backside throw that is open, and Ayuk profiles as their deep threat. And I think that's where he benefits best. Agree with everything you guys say, but I just want fantasy managers to get that one thing. Ayuk would be a perfect stylistic fit for that action at the line, the RPO back to RG3 and now Lance. That is the direct beneficiary, is that downfield shot.
That's a great point. And honestly, I've heard a lot of strong arguments for Brandon Ayuk, but that right there, just talking about the history of the Shanahan offense and comparing him to Pierre Garçon, that makes a ton of sense. So love that poll, Jim. Jim, I feel like I learned so much from you today. This was a great show. I really like, we talked about this a little bit before the show, but I like when people kind of focus on the narrative and the storylines a little bit more than the numbers. And I feel like that's all you did today was really drop some knowledge on us. So I appreciate that. Eric, of course, I appreciate you being on here. This is so fun that, almost a year later, we get to link up on a show again together. So before we sign off, Eric, let everyone know where they can find you, where they can donate, when the deadline is, and then everything you got to plug with Pros with Joes.
Yeah, so anyone who's been watching the live stream has been watching my eyes kind of dart back and forth. So while we've been on the air, both Dave and Jim have seen some donations coming across. So for anyone that's listening and has chosen to support, thank you very much for your support. Anyone who's still looking for a way to get in on the action, it's ticking across the bottom of your screen right now, proswithjoes.rallyup.com. If you want to go directly to Dave's page, it's /Dave Kluge. If you want to go directly to Jim's page, it's /Jim Coventry, or you can just search everyone's name there from the donor center. Again, proswithjoes.rallyup.com. For the information on the charity league, when we're drafting, the podcast that I mentioned, you can follow us on Twitter. It's @proswithjoes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. And Jim, let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter, what you're working on, and what they should expect if they pick you to be the pro that they want to play with in Pros with Joes. I think you're muted, Jim.
Sorry about that.
Nope, all good.
Yes. So you can find me at Jim Coventry NFL. I'm with RotoWire for those who subscribe. Otherwise, if you don't, while a little bit of preseason stuff, I do training camp notes. Those are out for free. Also on the weekends on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Channel. Saturdays all season I'll be on there 1 to 3 Eastern. Love that. But whoever gets selected to draft with me, look, I will be whatever you need me to be. I will be your sounding board. I will give you my big board to use. I will work with you, but you'll manage a team and I will be your co-pilot. Utilize me however you feel best for your success, our success.
Awesome. Well, thank both of you so much for tuning in today, or for joining me today, and thank you to everybody that tuned in. I will be back next week with Eli and Mike at the All In Network. Just about a year ago, they asked me to come on my first show ever as a guest, and now I get to pay it forward for them a little bit, having them on Kickoff Thursday next week, right before the game. So be sure to tune into that. Thanks again for joining, guys, and I will see everybody next week.